Welcome to Module 5, Equity and Inclusiveness. We have several objectives and one SLO for this. So we're looking at various devices, how to create accessible and equitable learning materials. We're going to review the laws, or some laws and policies again, focusing on the equity and cyberbullying aspects, and then classroom management strategies, and different activities given different scenarios. And this will help us accomplish SLO 3, which is create online learning and materials and modules that are accessible and equitable using research-based strategies. So this module is again a little bit different. You are going to have reflection 2 at the end to keep in mind. We have digital citizenship, equity, inclusiveness, cultural competence, and humanizing online learning, as well as parent, guardian, and community engagement. So each of these topics could be a research paper in themselves, right? And so the focus of this class is not to research in depth all of these, but to be able to be aware of what these topics are. All right, so if you were maybe teaching a class where you're giving students 5 different topics to choose from, which ones to research, this might be a way to set up that. So students can peruse the topics a little bit, kind of get a feel for which of them they are, which ones they're interested in, and then they can pick one to really do their research on for their research paper. So that's the way I'm going to present this, as if I'm giving you a quick overview of them all with the imaginary expectation you would go into researching them more. And so in the second course, you would actually do that second part of researching something more in depth. At the end, you're going to have a quiz based on the previous module, which was the laws and policies, and these best practices that you're going to look through. Okay, so the first one is digital citizenship. And so this is the same approach I'll take on all of these pages, which is, all right, we have this kind of board of various items. And I try to include different age ranges, right, different topics, and then at the bottom, questions to think about. So again, if we're approaching this as a research type module, these are some questions that you could use to focus your research. And so as you're thinking about your future classroom, check out this bottom section, right? How will you explain what digital citizenship is to your class? So some of these questions will be more applicable to you depending on what you're teaching. And so focus on the ones that are more meaningful to you. All right, if you're plagiarism, so that would probably be for the older students. And then how do you communicate your norms? So there are some articles on plagiarism, classroom management in Zoom, or different things like that if that interests you. Equity. So here's a common image comparing equality and equity. Equality is giving everyone the same thing, right? Whereas equity is giving everyone the same opportunity. And so giving them the resources they need so that they can all have the same opportunity. And you'll see another variation of this on the next page, but that's what I wanted to focus on for this page. And then there's this video that I really like. It's actually really old, and it talks about the importance of online education. So I find it funny. Not haha funny, but ironic. And again, think about your school, your classroom. Does it provide equality or equity? And what other resources might your students need to make sure they have equitable access? Inclusiveness. So how do we make sure every student feels welcome and engaged and in the conversation? So here's the picture I was talking about. It's going to give you a third picture, and think about that third picture. What would that mean in an online classroom? And again, you have equity, inclusiveness, This grading one is really interesting. And so how can we grade more equitably? I was really intrigued with that one. Here's Name Coach. So there is a system called Name Coach in Canvas if your school and district has it. It's another way to include students and making sure we can pronounce all students' names and appreciate all students' preferred choices. More inclusive online Zoom, so lots of different things. And then the Hour of Code. So Hour of Code is notorious for trying to be inclusive. All languages, all nationalities, all genders, of how everyone can be involved in coding. And so, again, I encourage you to visit this, especially if you're in the STEM areas or you want to help reach as many students as possible to get them engaged in the STEM areas. All right, the challenge is 1 hour. So if you click on it, you have different grades, and they can all do 1 hour. It's has lots of different activities to try and appeal to all students. So this is one way to be inclusive, right? It's trying to appeal to all different students, giving them lots of options for that 1 hour. And again, questions to think about. Cultural competence. So when we were first writing this course, one of the buzzwords was cultural sensitivity. But as I was chosen to teach this course, I wanted to focus on cultural competence. So there's 4 basic stages, and so I'm kind of simplifying it, but there's cultural knowledge, right, where you know other cultures exist. Cultural awareness, where you're aware of the different cultures. You might be aware of the different subsets, and maybe you can pick them out a little bit. Cultural sensitivity. And so I say that this one is a must for an effective teacher. And this is where you realize the differences between cultures, and you're not putting a good, a bad, or lesser than, or more than on them. You're just realizing they're different, and you're even trying to expect those differences in a classroom situation. But when you get to the cultural competence, that is, how can I include the different cultures in this experience? How can I learn about my students' cultures so that I'm trying to represent them, or I'm trying to give them a voice to represent themselves through the experience? So there's a lot of different resources, several videos. And I'm not saying we all need to be culturally competent to be good teachers, but it's something I think we should all strive for, when possible. And it's also important to realize culture isn't just race and ethnicity, right? There's lots of different ways culture exists. Religion, socioeconomic status, regions, right? The culture of Central Valley is going to be different than the Bay Area culture, which is going to be different than Chicago. Right? So regions give us culture too. Gender, sexuality, if that's age applicable for you, and other scenarios. And then almost finally is humanizing learning. So remembering that we're all human, right? The social, emotional aspects that crisis help. We're in a pandemic. This is crisis for a lot of people right now. There's a lot of things going on in 2020. And we need to be aware of that, but we also need to be aware of how can we make sure that students feel like humans, not just technology being talked to or things like that. So these are some resources. It's very limited because it's still a growing field. And also for you, how can you practice self-care during this to make sure that you still feel human through all of this? Finally, for reals, is the parent, guardian, and community engagement aspect. So at times it's going to feel like you are teaching for 2 classes, one for your students and one for their parents, guardians, and families. That can happen. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat that part. But how can we kind of be more prepared? And so here's some kind of tips that you can share with parents, because they're going to come with questions. They're going to probably come with complaints and baggage from whatever happened in the spring. So be prepared for that. And then, what's your school doing? What kind of resources is your school and district probably providing that you didn't know was there? Your teaching assistants. I know some schools weren't able to use them because of the quick switch. So how can you go back and think, what can I do? How can I use them in this next phase of online learning? Younger students have different needs. Special education have different needs, and unfortunately there's still not a lot of resources for this, but hopefully there's something, or you can at least feel other people's pain through trying to find the resources. And then service learning. So I wanted to point this out because there might be older students, or you might have older students, and so think about how can we provide service learning opportunities for students? How can you reward parents for their involvement and their partnering in their students' learning? I know we hope they would all do this, but right, if they don't have another job and this is all that they have right now and it's not what they expected, can we give them credit? Can we give them service learning recognition for their help and services? Same with teenagers in the house. If they're taking the time to help their younger siblings, can that count towards some kind of learning service, or can that count towards a project in a different class? All right, so think of how can you embed the different responsibilities our students have, even the parents, their responsibilities. How can you reward that, and how can you acknowledge that and celebrate it, right? And finally, you're going to have a quiz. It's 10 questions. Some of it's automatically graded, some of it's not. And this is just giving you different situations or scenarios and how you're going to apply those laws, policies, and best practices. So there you have it. That's Module 5.